Hi, I'm Mohsen, and I'm so excited to welcome you to The Seeking Soul. This podcast is a space where we explore topics like philosophy, spirituality, and literature, often from perspectives you may not have encountered before. As someone who grew up traveling, I've had the privilege of witnessing the deep similarities between cultures and people, even when mainstream narratives focus on what divides us. As an Iranian American, I've always felt to share the beauty, wisdom, and lessons from my Eastern heritage with my Western community, and vice versa. My hope is to be a bridge between these two worlds, fostering the sense of oneness and unity. With the help of AI, this dream feels more achievable than ever. Using documents and notes, I've provided with the link of the sources in the description. Along the way, you might encounter ideas that feel new, challenging, or even uncomfortable, and that's okay. That's the purpose of this space, to listen with empathy and approach every perspective with love and curiosity. Welcome to the Seeking Soul.
Welcome back, everyone. We've got an exciting deep dive lined up today, exploring Iranian identity through the lens of its literature.
Sounds fascinating.
It is, and we've got a great starting point. Our source this time is an excerpt from a Farsi lecture, Adabiyat Darmani, which translates to literature as therapy.
Okay, I'm intrigued already. Literature as therapy. That suggests a pretty deep connection between the written word and, I guess, the soul of a culture.
Exactly, and that's precisely the approach this lecture takes, going beyond just the historical facts and figures to uncover how literature reflects the true essence of Iranian identity. It's not just about what happened, but how people felt, what they valued, what they dreamed of.
Makes sense. So how does the lecture actually go about doing that?
Well, right from the start, the lecturer makes this really compelling point. They say literature acts as a mirror, reflecting the true essence of a culture.
A mirror, huh? That's a powerful image.
It is. They even compare history to a carefully constructed path. Like, you might be following a set route, but you don't necessarily see what's hidden beneath the surface.
Ah, I see. So history might give you the official narrative, but literature gives you the raw, unfiltered experience.
That's the idea. They describe literature as a messe de minuit, or midnight feast, offering a raw, unfiltered glimpse into the soul of a people.
Okay, a midnight feast. I like that. So we're getting at the hidden stories, the whispers in the dark, the things that official accounts might try to gloss over.
Exactly. And that brings us to one of the key themes that runs through a lot of Persian literature, what the lecture refers to as God consciousness.
God consciousness. Okay. Can you elaborate on that a bit? What exactly does that mean in the context of Persian literature?
It's basically this idea that awareness of the divine, of a higher power, permeates every aspect of life and is reflected in their stories, their poems, their plays.
I see. So it's not just about religious texts. It's woven into the fabric of their literary tradition as a whole.
Exactly. And there's this really striking quote from the lecture that I think captures this beautifully. It says, "God is found not just in the heavens, but in the face of humanity."
Wow. God is found not just in the heavens, but in the face of humanity. That's powerful. It suggests profound connection between the divine and the human experience, not a separation.
Right. It's not about looking up to the sky for God, but seeing the divine spark within each other in the everyday moments of life.
So this idea of finding the divine in the human experience, it kind of leads into the next point, right? The lecture talks about beauty in Persian culture and how it's seen as something sacred.
You got it. They argue that beauty is sacred precisely because it reflects that divine light we were just talking about. It's not just about being aesthetically pleasing, it's about connecting to something deeper, something transcendent.
That's interesting. It makes you think about how we view beauty in the West, right? Is it mostly about appearances, about superficial things, or do we also see it as something deeper, something connected to a spiritual dimension?
That's a great question. And I think the lecture challenges us to consider those different perspectives on beauty. They're arguing that in Persian culture, beauty is a way of experiencing the divine, of connecting to something larger than ourselves.
Makes sense. And it sounds like this lecture isn't shying away from challenging some Western assumptions.
Not at all. In fact, the next point they make really emphasizes that openness and acceptance that seems to be woven into Persian literature. They talk about how it embraces diverse faiths and viewpoints, even those that might seem contradictory at first glance.
Okay, so we're talking about tolerance,
Well, Pat,
openness to other beliefs and ways of thinking.
Exactly. And to illustrate this point, They bring up the story of the three magi following the star. The wise men who traveled from the east to find the baby Jesus.
Yeah.
The lecturer uses that story to symbolize this willingness to embrace a light, regardless of its origin. It's about being open to different paths and beliefs, not just tolerating them, but actually seeking understanding.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Seeking understanding. And they go even further than that, right? There's another quote you mentioned that really stuck with me.
You mean the one about seeing the divine in a Christian beloved within a church?
Yes, that's the one. It just speaks volumes about the kind of tolerance and acceptance that we're talking about here. It's not about imposing one belief system on everyone else, but recognizing the inherent value in different perspectives.
Absolutely. And I think that sets the stage really well for the rest of our deep dive. We've seen how the lecture emphasizes literature as this mirror reflecting the true essence of a culture, and how those core values of God consciousness and tolerance are woven into the very fabric of Iranian identity.
Yeah, it's a great foundation. I'm really curious to see where this goes next. And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of Persian literature, and one that you might find a bit surprising.
Oh, do tell.
It's their celebration of life, even in the face of sorrow.
Now, that is interesting. It's not what we typically associate with, say, mourning or grief, at least not in Western cultures.
Right. And the lecture really challenges those preconceptions. It explains how rhythm and music are often incorporated into Persian literature, even when dealing with themes of loss, sadness, even death.
So it's not about denying the sadness or trying to pretend it doesn't exist?
Not at all. It's more about recognizing that joy and sorrow are both part of the human experience, and that even in the darkest of times, there's still a reason to celebrate the beauty of life.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going. So how exactly does this play out in Persian literature? Can you give me some specific examples?
Sure. The lecture talks about how even mourning rituals, which we often think of as somber and silent, actually incorporate rhythm and music in Iranian culture.
Wow, that's fascinating. So instead of just weeping and wailing, there's this element of, I don't know, maybe rhythmic chanting or drumming.
Exactly. And this rhythmic element isn't just incidental. It's actually seen as a way of processing grief, of finding strength and solace in the face of loss.
I see. It's like the rhythm itself becomes a source of comfort and resilience.
That's a great way to put it. And this emphasis on rhythm isn't limited to mourning rituals. It extends to their poetry as well. The lecture even contrasts the complexity of rhythm in Persian poetry with the simpler, more regular rhythms we often find in English poetry.
So the rhythm itself is more intricate, more nuanced.
Exactly. It's like the rhythm itself embodies that dynamism and emotional depth of their cultural expression.
I love that. It's not just what they're saying, it's how they're saying it. The rhythm itself becomes part of the meaning.
Exactly. And this appreciation for rhythm and complexity, it kind of ties into the next point, which is a bit more, well, maybe a bit controversial, especially from a modern perspective.
Controversial. Now I'm really intrigued. What's the lecture getting at here?
It's about the portrayal of women in Persian literature.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I can see how that could be a sensitive topic, especially given the way women are often portrayed in some traditional texts.
Right. And the lecture acknowledges that this can be a complex and nuanced issue. But instead of shying away from it, they actually encourage a more nuanced understanding, focusing on the archetype of the beloved, which is often used to represent the divine feminine.
The beloved as the divine feminine. Okay, I'm listening. Tell me more about this archetype.
It's not about portraying women as weak or subservient, but rather as representing a powerful and mysterious force, a source of inspiration and spiritual longing.
Okay, so there's this element of mystery, of reverence even, surrounding the feminine in Persian literature.
Exactly. And they use this interesting analogy to illustrate this concept. They say the woman sits on the throne of grace, while man is portrayed as yearning and striving.
The throne of grace. I see how that could be interpreted as elevating the feminine to a position of spiritual authority. But I can also see how some people might find that imagery a bit outdated, maybe even a bit problematic from a contemporary feminist perspective. What do you think?
Yeah, it definitely raises some questions.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to remember that these archetypes emerge from a different cultural and historical context. And maybe instead of dismissing them outright, we can try to understand the deeper symbolism at play here.
So it's about trying to understand the cultural values that shape these stories, not necessarily judging them by our own modern standards.
Exactly. And I think the lecture encourages that kind of open-mindedness. They're not saying these portrayals are perfect or without flaw, but they are suggesting that there's more to them than meets the eye, and that understanding those deeper layers can give us a more nuanced appreciation for Persian literature and Iranian culture as a whole.
Makes sense. It's about trying to see things from their perspective, even if it's different from our own. And this discussion about the feminine and the divine, it actually connects to another aspect of Persian culture that we haven't really touched on yet: music.
Oh, absolutely. The lecture emphasizes how deeply intertwined music is with their literary traditions. It's not just entertainment, it's an integral part of their cultural and spiritual expression.
Right. And they even point out that Persian music often had thematic elements, with each piece conveying specific emotions and ideas.
Exactly. It's like music serves as another language for expressing their cultural and spiritual depths. And this emphasis on music goes hand in hand with their love for rhythm, as we discussed earlier. They even argue that the intricate and diverse rhythms in Persian poetry are often overlooked in Western interpretations.
It's like we're only hearing part of the story if we don't understand the role of music and rhythm in their culture.
Precisely. And it highlights this idea that to truly appreciate another culture, we need to be open to experiencing it through all our senses, not just through the intellect.
That's beautifully put. It's about engaging with the culture on its own terms, not just trying to fit it into our own preconceived boxes.
Exactly. And this openness to experiencing the world through all our senses is, I think, a key to understanding the Iranian worldview as a whole. It's about embracing the richness and complexity of life, finding the divine stark in the everyday, and celebrating the beauty of existence, even in the face of sorrow.
Okay, I'm seeing a pattern here. This embrace of complexity, of finding the divine in the human experience. It seems to be a recurring theme.
You're absolutely right, and that leads us to another fascinating point in the lecture: the Iranian view on the nature of religion itself.
Oh, okay. This should be interesting. What's their take on religion?
Well, they argue that for Iranians, religion is a two-part experience. It's not just about intellectual understanding, but about how you live your life, how you interact with the world around you. It's about putting your beliefs into action, making them a lived reality.
So it's not just about faith, it's about deeds.
Precisely. And they highlight this concept of widat al-wujud, or unity of being, suggesting that God is present in all things. This isn't just an abstract philosophical idea. It's a way of life that informs their cultural practice and values.
So for them, the divine isn't something separate or distant. It's woven into the fabric of everyday life.
Exactly. And they share this thought-provoking quote to emphasize this point: "Woe to the people whose God is in the sky." It challenges the notion of a distant, removed God, emphasizing the need to experience the divine in our daily lives, in our interactions with each other and with the natural world.
Wow, that's a powerful image. Woe to the people whose God is in the sky. It really drives home the point that for them, spirituality isn't about escaping from the world, it's about finding the sacred within it.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that the divine is present in everything, and that by living a life of service and compassion, we're actually expressing that divine spark within ourselves.
So we see how this idea of experiencing the divine in daily life leads them to a discussion of service and compassion.
Right. They argue that in Persian culture, the highest form of being is to serve others. It's not about personal gain or status. It's about contributing to the well-being of your community and the world. It's about recognizing our interconnectedness and using our lives to make a positive impact.
And to really bring this point home, they bring up the Zoroastrian tradition of tying a kusti or sacred thread around the waist as a symbol of service.
Oh, that's right. It's a physical reminder of their commitment to serving others. Not just a belief, but an action.
Exactly. It's about weaving that commitment into the very fabric of their lives. And I think this message of service and compassion, it really resonates across cultures and time. It's a reminder that our lives have meaning beyond our own individual pursuits, and that true fulfillment comes from giving back and making a positive impact on the world.
Absolutely. And it challenges us to ask ourselves, how are we living our lives? Are we focused solely on our own needs and desires? Or are we actively seeking ways to contribute to the well-being of others and make the world a better place?
Big questions, and it seems like this lecture is full of them.
It is, and that's what makes it so fascinating. It's not just giving us information, it's challenging us to think differently, to see the world through a new lens. And that, I think, is the power of engaging with other cultures. It forces us to step outside of our own comfort zones and consider different ways of being in the world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay.
So to kind of recap this part of our deep dive, we've explored how the lecture sets forth this idea of religion as a two-part experience. Intellectual understanding combined with living a life of service and compassion. And central to that is the concept of Widat al-Wujud, this idea that the divine isn't distant and separate, but actually present in every aspect of their lives, motivating them to contribute to the well-being of others.
Beautifully summarized. And that focus on service and compassion, it really ties into another crucial aspect highlighted in the lecture: the importance of tolerance and understanding, a value that seems to permeate Iranian culture.
Right. And we touched on this a bit earlier with the story of the Magi, but they go even deeper here. They argue that historically, Persian culture has been very open to other religions and perspectives. They don't just tolerate differences, they see the divine light in all faiths, not just their own.
Exactly. And to drive this point home, they bring up that story of the Magi again, those wise men who followed a star to Bethlehem,
Yeah.
even though it led them to a different religious tradition.
Right. It's such a powerful symbol of that openness and willingness to embrace a light, regardless of its origin. It's not about clinging to one narrow path, but recognizing that there are many ways to connect with the divine.
It makes you wonder, how can we cultivate that same spirit of tolerance and understanding in our own lives and community?
Yeah, how can we be more like the Magi, more willing to follow a light, even if it leads us outside of our comfort zones, beyond our own familiar beliefs and traditions?
That's the challenge, isn't it? To open ourselves up to the unknown, to embrace the diversity of human experience, and to see the divine spark in everyone, regardless of their background or beliefs. And I think that's a perfect segue to the next part of our discussion.
Oh, and where are we headed next?
Well, the lecture goes on to explore how this openness extends beyond religious tolerance. They talk about how Persian literature celebrates all forms of beauty, always striving to find harmony in the world. They even connect this to the intricate designs and patterns found in Persian rugs, architecture, even their music.
You know, I've always been captivated by the intricate details and vibrant colors of Persian rugs. They're mesmerizing.
Right. And they're not just beautiful objects, they're actually symbolic representations of this idea of finding harmony and balance in the world. Each element, each color, each knot contributes to the overall beauty and integrity of the design.
It's like a metaphor for life itself, isn't it? All these
Yeah.
different elements coming together to create something whole and beautiful.
Exactly. And they argue that this pursuit of harmony and beauty is directly linked to their spiritual beliefs. They see the divine reflected in the order and balance of the natural world.
So it's not just about aesthetics, it's about connecting to something deeper, something spiritual.
Precisely. And it highlights this idea that for them, beauty isn't superficial, it's a reflection of the divine order that underlies all of creation.
That's beautiful. And it makes me think about how we often separate things in the West, like art and religion, beauty and spirituality. But this lecture suggests a more holistic view, where these things are all interconnected.
I agree, and that interconnectedness, that sense of wholeness, it's a recurring theme throughout the lecture.
So I'm gathering that this idea of balance is pretty central to the Iranian worldview.
You got it. And they even have a specific term for it, su'is, which means balance. It's about finding that sweet spot between extremes, not getting too caught up in one way of thinking or being.
It's about embracing the paradox, right? The light and the shadow, the joy and the sorrow, the masculine and the feminine.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that life is full of contradictions, and that true wisdom lies in finding a way to hold those contradictions together, to create a harmonious whole.
I like that. It's a very holistic approach to life, isn't it? And it reminds me of another aspect of Persian culture that we often hear about. Their strong emphasis on family and community.
Oh, absolutely. The lecture talks about how Persian literature often stresses the importance of family bonds and respecting elders. It's about recognizing where we come from, honoring our roots.
Right, and it's not just about family ties, it's about community as a whole. They have that complex system of politeness and etiquette called taraf, which governs social interactions in Iranian culture.
Oh yeah, tear off. It's fascinating, isn't it? All those intricate rules about how to offer and receive gifts, how to show hospitality.
It's like a whole language in itself.
It is, and it's all about showing respect, humility, and consideration for others. It's about putting the needs of others before your own and fostering a sense of community and harmony.
It really highlights the importance they place on relationships and social connections, doesn't it?
It does, and it's a good reminder that even something as seemingly simple as etiquette can reveal deeper cultural values. It's not just about being polite. It's about acknowledging the importance of those around us and nurturing those bonds of connection.
That's beautiful. And it makes me think about how important it is to be aware of these cultural differences, especially when we're interacting with people from other backgrounds. It's about being respectful and trying to understand the meaning behind those customs.
Absolutely. It's about being mindful and approaching those interactions with curiosity and an open mind.
And that open-mindedness, that willingness to learn and grow, I think it's essential for bridging those cultural divides and building a more harmonious world.
I couldn't agree more. And that brings us to another interesting point in the lecture, one that touches on the theme of individual contributions within a larger context.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What do they say about individual contributions?
Well, they use this lovely analogy, comparing different cultures to guests bringing their own unique dishes to a grand feast. Each culture brings something special to the table, contributing to the richness and diversity of the overall experience.
I love that analogy. It's not about competition, it's about collaboration.
Exactly. And they specifically highlight the contributions of Persian culture, urging listeners to embrace their heritage and share their gifts with the world.
So it's about recognizing the unique beauty and value that each culture brings to the table and celebrating that diversity.
Precisely. It's not about one culture being better than another. It's about recognizing that we all have something to offer, and that by working together, we can create something even richer and more beautiful.
That's a beautiful message. And it's especially relevant for younger generations, isn't it?
Absolutely. They encourage young people to learn about their cultural roots, connect with their heritage, and find inspiration in the wisdom of their ancestors. It's about carrying the torch and keeping those traditions alive for future generations.
I think that's a really important point. It's about honoring the past while also looking to the future. And that brings us to another interesting theme that emerges in this part of the lecture. The idea that identity isn't fixed or static, but fluid and evolving.
Exactly. They argue that identity is a process, not a product. It's constantly being shaped by our experiences, our relationships, and our interactions with the world.
It's like we're always becoming, never quite arriving.
That's a great way to put it. And to illustrate this concept, they use this beautiful analogy, comparing human identity to the countless shadows cast by a single light source.
Oh, I like that. Each shadow is unique, but they all originate from the same source.
Exactly. It's a reminder that while we may share certain cultural values and traditions, we each experience and express those values in our own unique ways.
It's about recognizing the individual within the collective.
Precisely. And that diversity of expression, it's something to be celebrated, not feared. It's what makes the human experience so rich and multifaceted.
Right. And it ties back to that importance of tolerance and understanding that we talked about earlier. The more we embrace the diversity of human experience, the more we expand our own perspectives and grow as individuals.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we all have something unique to offer, and that by learning from each other, we can create a more harmonious and vibrant world.
Beautifully said. And it sounds like we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive. We've gone from the Iranian perspective on religion and tolerance to their emphasis on family, community, and even the fluid nature of identity. It's a lot to take in.
It is. But it's all connected, isn't it? It all points to this holistic understanding of the world, where everything is interconnected and each element plays a vital role in the larger tapestry of life.
That's a great way to put it. It's about seeing the bigger picture, understanding how all these different pieces fit together to create something whole and beautiful. And I think that's a perfect place to pause for now.
And that sense of purpose is beautifully illustrated in the lecture through a really powerful analogy.
Oh, right, the tapestry analogy. I remember that.
Yeah, they use the idea of a tapestry to describe how each individual life is like a single thread.
And how each thread, even though it might seem insignificant on its own, is actually crucial to the overall beauty and integrity of the design.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even the smallest actions, the smallest choices we make, can have a ripple effect, impacting the lives of others in ways we may never fully understand.
It's like that butterfly effect idea. One small flap of a butterfly's wings can create a hurricane on the other side of the world.
Exactly. And it ties back to that idea of interconnectedness that we've been talking about. Our lives are interwoven, and even seemingly insignificant acts of kindness or compassion can have a profound impact on the world around us.
It's a beautiful reminder that we're all connected, and that even though we might feel small or insignificant at times, our lives do have meaning and purpose.
And that brings us to another really interesting point that the lecture touches on, the concept of social justice in Persian culture.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering when we'd get to that. It's a topic that's obviously very relevant today, not just in Iran, but around the world.
Absolutely. And it's not just a modern concern. The lecture points out that social justice has been a central theme in Persian thought and literature for centuries.
So how do they approach social justice? What does it mean to them?
Well, they argue that it's not just about charity or helping those in need. It's about creating a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive and reach their full potential.
It's about leveling the playing field, ensuring that everyone has a fair shot at a good life.
Exactly. And they point to many examples in Persian history of rulers and leaders who worked to establish just and equitable societies where the rights of all citizens were protected, regardless of their social status or religious beliefs.
So it's not just an abstract ideal, it's something they've actually strived for throughout their history.
Right. And they also highlight the importance of education and knowledge as tools for empowering individuals and creating a more just and equitable society.
Knowledge is power, as they say.
Exactly. It's about giving people the tools they need to succeed, to break free from cycles of poverty and oppression, and to create a better future for themselves and their communities.
It's a reminder that social justice isn't just about handouts or charity. It's about creating a system where everyone has the opportunity to succeed and where the basic needs of all are met.
And that vision of a just and equitable society, it's something that continues to inspire and motivate people around the world.
It does. It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a more just world, and that even small acts of kindness and compassion can make a difference.
And speaking of inspiration, the lecture also talks about the power of art and beauty to uplift the human spirit and inspire positive change.
Yeah, they have such rich artistic traditions in Persia. From those incredible carpets and calligraphy to their architecture and music, it's mind-blowing.
It is, and they argue that these art forms aren't just aesthetically pleasing. They're expressions of the human spirit that have the power to transcend cultural boundaries and touch the hearts of people everywhere.
Art as a universal language, I like that.
Right. It can speak to us on a level that words sometimes can't reach. And they even suggest that beauty itself can be a pathway to the divine, a way of experiencing the harmony and perfection of the Creator.
It makes you think about all those breathtaking mosques and palaces, the intricate designs, the vibrant colors. It's like stepping into another world.
It is. And that sense of awe and wonder, that feeling of being transported to another realm, that's part of the power of art. It can elevate us, connect us, and inspire us to create a more beautiful and compassionate world.
So it's not just about admiring beauty, it's about letting it transform us, letting it inspire us to create more beauty in our own lives and in the world around us.
And that creative impulse, that desire to bring beauty into the world, it's not limited to traditional art forms. It can be found in everyday acts of creativity, from the way we decorate our homes to the way we interact with each other.
Right. It's about finding beauty in the mundane, in the everyday moments of life.
Exactly. And that brings us to the lecture's powerful conclusion. The expert shares an anecdote about an Iranian rug maker in London who, through his craft, made a statement about his heritage and his identity. It's a really touching story, and it highlights this idea that each of us can contribute to our cultural legacy in our own unique ways.
It's about finding your own way to express your heritage, to connect to your roots, and to share those gifts with the world.
Precisely. And the lecture ends with a call to action, encouraging listeners to delve deeper into Persian literature, to explore this rich and complex world for themselves. It's an invitation to discover the hidden treasures that await those who are willing to step outside of their comfort zones and embrace the beauty and wisdom of another culture.
So we've come to the end of our deep dive, and I have to say, it's been a really fascinating journey. We've covered so much ground, from the idea of God consciousness and tolerance, to the power of rhythm and music, the portrayal of women, the emphasis on family and community, and the importance of social justice and beauty. It's a lot to take in, but I think it gives us a much richer and more nuanced understanding of Iranian identity and the values that have shaped their culture.
I completely agree. And I think one of the key takeaways for me is this idea that there's always more than one way to see the world. By engaging with other cultures, by opening ourselves up to different perspectives, we can challenge our own assumptions, expand our horizons, and ultimately grow as individuals.
Beautifully said, and I think that's a perfect note to end on. So, to all our listeners out there, I encourage you to take up the lecture's challenge. Dive into the world of Persian literature, explore its hidden treasures, and see what insights and inspiration you might find there. You might be surprised by what you discover.